If you've been in this indoor rowing world for a little bit, you may have heard maybe a couple times from a couple different instructors that rowing is all about pushing with the legs and we want to pull with the arms last. But we can't ignore that at some point in our stroke, we do have to pull with our arms. So as far as strength training goes, if rowing is already a pulling motion, why do we need to work on pulling motions in our strength training? Well, in this video, I'm going to go over for pulling movements, the why, how to, and then also a little bit on how to incorporate these pulling movements into your strength training routine to go along with your rowing workouts. So if rowing is a pulling motion at some point, why do we want to focus on adding pulling movements into our strength training routine? Well, the first and more obvious reason is that you can build strength for your rowing stroke. Now, we know that we want to push with the legs first, but at some point, you do get 10% of that power in that stroke does come from your arms. So naturally, if those lats, those pulling muscles get stronger, you can hopefully have and work to have a stronger pull at the end of your stroke. So number one, getting stronger pulling at the end of your rowing stroke. The second one is that I've said these in all of my videos. If you haven't been following the series, I've talked about squatting, deadlifting, pushing movements, now talking about pulling movements, and all of them I mentioned that all of these movements are functional, and that is probably the number one reason to do them. Functional meaning that you do these movements in everyday life. Something like pulling something close to you, or if you need to pull something off of a shelf, or pull yourself up to get out of, like, let's say you're getting out of a pool, or climbing up a ladder, things like that. So that's a couple functional examples, functional meaning that it mimics everyday life. So that's the second reason that you want to be working on improving your strength in your pulling movements. Now for a little on how to do some pulling movements. So regardless of the pulling movement that it is, there are some similarities that we can always think about depending on what the pulling movement is. So first, it's important to know that pulling movements can be broken down into two categories, the vertical pull and the horizontal pull. So rowing is a horizontal pull. We're pulling in the horizontal plane. But then we also have vertical pulls where we are pulling ourselves up. So a good example of that is a pull-up. So for vertical pull-ups and horizontal, there's a couple key points that we want to keep in mind. So ideally for both movements, similar to how we do our pushing movements, is we want those elbows to stay close to our side. We don't want them to be flaring out. And I'll show you some examples here in a quick second. So keeping those elbows close when we're pulling this way and when we're pulling up, or with our grip like that. Pulling, keeping those elbows close. We don't want to pull like this. So another thing is when we're doing these pulling motions, it's important to keep our core tight and do these movements in a controlled manner. That's going to help you build strength and have more coordination, and typically you're able to move a little bit more, just a nice and controlled to really isolate and work the muscles that we want to work. So for a horizontal pull that's different than rowing, an example that I'm going to show you today is the bent over row. So there's two ways you can do it. You can use a chair if you want to, you don't have to, but one way to use the chair or any surface is so that you can put your hand on it. So this kind of helps stable a little bit so you can really isolate the arm movement instead of worrying about, using the core as much. So from here we can stabilize with our hand, nice and controlled up with our elbow back as we bring that down. Now, you can always do it without the chair. So without the chair, you can put your arm on your knee. If you don't have anything to use to brace, row in and down nice and controlled. So that's one example. Then another example of a pull-up movement. So there's a couple progressions that you can do. Same thing with a pull-up. We want to make sure that as we're pulling down that those elbows are staying close. We're engaging those lats as we get that chin over the bar, being controlled, coming back down. So that is an example of a horizontal pull. There's a couple progressions that you can do to work up to that. There's the ring row, the banded pull-up, you can do pull-up negatives. There's a lot of different examples and things that you can do to work up to a pull-up. And that's not the only vertical pulling motion. There's lat pull downs. There's a lot of different other machines at the gym that you can use that help with that pulling motion. There's a couple ways you can incorporate your pulling strength movements into your rowing workouts. The first is to get a separate strength program. So a separate strength program is going to work you through a couple different exercises, and that can be separate from your rowing workouts. I highly suggest that if you go this route, that if you're doing both your strength and rowing on the same day, that you do your strength training before you do your rowing workouts. So when you highly suggest purchasing a strength program, because a certified coach is going to know how to program that correctly. So I've talked about a lot of different kinds of movements in other videos, things like squatting, deadlifting, pushing, and pulling. Those will all be incorporated into a strength program from somebody who is certified and has the knowledge to build something that's going to work your entire body. So highly recommend, if you're going that route, really any route, that you find something from a coach that you trust. So another way to incorporate these strength building pulling exercises is to get into some on and off style erg workouts. So what that means is these workouts might have you rowing a little bit, then doing some other exercises, coming back to the rower, doing some rounds for time. Maybe it's 20-minute AMRAP or whatever it may be, where you're getting on and off of the rower, mixing in different kinds of exercises. Typically, all the exercises will range from the squat, hinge, push, and pull, but you can always incorporate some pulling movements with some weights, or if it's pull-ups on a pull-up bar or ring rows, however or whatever equipment that you have, you can get those incorporated into some on and off erg style workout. So that's another way. If you can find a program that kind of progressively builds you up in those on and off erg style workouts, that will also help you get stronger basically in your whole body, but also in that pulling motion. Thanks for hanging out and joining me today for this video. Thanks for following along. If you are curious on these other videos that I've been talking about, I do have some other videos up for strength training and learning how to, especially and why you should squat, deadlift, and do some pushing motions. So definitely check those out. And thanks for following along with this series.